So here we are, another episode, Collective Evolution Podcast. We're here with Ananda Moore. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. When I initially got the access to watch your film, Magic Pills, I was like, I've looked into homeopathy a bit. I know a bit about it. I don't know tons about it. I get the, sort of some of the underlying aspects of nanoparticles, of energy, essentially, right?
Well, that's more than most people get, so
right.
It's pretty cool.
And on the flip side, a lot of people will say, it's just sugar pills, right? So we're going to be talking about homeopathy today. We're going to be talking about the film. We're going to get into all that sort of stuff. But let's start this. Let's get this from the bare bones of a lot of people don't understand exactly what homeopathy is, right? Which is normal because in our society, it's laughable, quote unquote, right? That's how people view it. And we're going to change that. So let's start with a little bit about your journey into homeopathy. And then let's get clear on what it is.
Okay, so I guess we can try to do both
in
one fell swoop. I first heard about homeopathy when I was in university, and I thought I was taking this really cool religious studies course called Witchcraft and the Occult. And so we were studying about all kinds of crazy practices and things that, part of me always was interested in and really believed in, but we were looking at things from a skeptical perspective. And our textbook was called How to Think About Strange Things. I think I just got rid of it. I did a purge in my house and out went How to Think About Strange Things, which was really a guide on being skeptical.
Right.
Which I think there's nothing wrong with that. We need to be genuinely skeptical and question everything today. So
critically think.
Critical thinking, absolutely. Yeah. So we learned, I was totally into natural medicine, even Reiki and acupuncture, and loved, there was a Wiccan woman in our class, and she was sharing her ceremonies with us, and I was entranced. And then they started teaching about homeopathy and how these crazy people believe that you can take a substance, dilute it and dilute it and dilute it until there's nothing there, and that somehow is going to cure people. And when you hear it that way, it just sounds like bullshit. Can I swear here?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's just, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you wonder how people can be so stupid and so gullible that they spend all this money on basically sugar pills or sugar or water.
Yeah.
So I was pretty much convinced that it didn't work, and I thought I knew what it was. And I graduated from university. I did my, the year off and went off to India to explore the world and learn more about myself. And I was in this place called, we were in Hampi, and I got super sick. And I was traveling with this lovely German woman, and her mom was a homeopath. So she was traveling with her homeopathic kit. And I'm in this place. I woke up throwing up, wondering what the hell was wrong with me. And she came in and she's pulls out her little kit and offers me some remedies. And I was like, whatever.
Sure.
I'll try those. And so I took some little sugar pills. No idea what they were. Probably arsenicum. And 15 minutes later, I felt fine, and I got on with my day, and I was a little bit impressed, and I opened my mind a little bit more to the idea.
But before we continue, let's go back to the symptoms a little bit so we can paint this picture a little.
Oh, they're gross.
You don't have to go into every detail, but I want to make sure it's were you just having an episode of I puked, or were you you were feeling it? There was something going on here.
It was violently coming out both ends.
Okay, so probably the standard food poisoning or challenge that sometimes people will get when they first expose themselves to a new environment.
In this place, they call them camps, and they're little kind of very rudimentary huts made of twigs, basically, and branches. And there's a little restaurant there, and we're all eating there, and tons of people woke up sick that morning. So I wasn't the only one who got food poisoning.
Right.
Obviously something was wrong, and most people were sick for a few days.
Right.
And within a really short period of time, I was up and about.
And so in terms of improvement, you stopped having stuff come out of your body.
Yeah.
And you did you feel wow, this was you felt back to normal, or you were
No, I felt back to normal, which I think is a little atypical. You don't 100% feel better that quickly often, but it can happen, and I've seen it happen lots of times.
Okay.
But yeah, it was pretty instant. It was really fast, and I felt fine.
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
that's awesome.
I'm good to go. And so it opened up my mind a little bit. And then I went and did not to sound too cheesy, but I went and did a Reiki course. And during that course, which was this like month-long course, I started getting pictures and images of homeopathy, and I should be a homeopath and homeopathy. And so I also went to see a homeopath.
Yeah.
And I had been struggling with depression for most of my life that I could remember up to that point. I was in my 20s then. And depression runs in my family. And I went to see this homeopath, and he gave me some pills, and within a few months I was feeling a lot better. And I can say that hasn't really been an issue for a very long time now. Over 20 years.
Nice.
So I think that's where I had my real aha moment too. So then I decided to move to Toronto and study homeopathy.
Nice. And where were you living before?
I went to school in Edmonton.
Okay.
And before that I was in Calgary.
Okay.
And I'd been traveling for years. Like I was on the road a lot.
So West Centralish Canada is
Yeah.
Do you miss it there?
No. I miss the mountains.
Yeah. We were just having a conversation, Ruby and I, about like, you know, how people always talk about it's such a beautiful place, like in Calgary and Alberta, or sorry, BC, Alberta and BC, which they are, you know, but people haven't visited Northern Ontario, which, if you've ever been, is like it's a really, really beautiful place. Anywho, let's go back to it. I always have to get that in there because I get passionate about Northern Ontario.
See, I've never been crazy far north. Like I want to go to like Manitoulin and all those places.
Oh,
I
yeah.
haven't seen.
You go up there, it gets like not mountainous, but almost like mountainous.
Yeah.
And waterfalls and like a lot of cool. It's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful.
You gotta do it.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're getting into homeopathy. You're starting to feel like this is something that's you believe in at this point, and you've obviously learned more about. And then you moved to Toronto, and you said you studied it?
Yeah. So I went to school here and did a 3-year program, full-time program. And then I went to India. And in India, homeopathy is very accepted. It's part of the medical system. They have proper medical homeopathic colleges. They have a lot of research facilities. They have hospitals. So it's part of life, and it's very accepted part of life there. And so I went and studied at a homeopathic hospital there, and I preceptored with different homeopaths to just keep learning more.
Nice. And so, like, you know, what you described is almost like a cultural difference too, that I guess would be over there. It's like, it's not like here it's laughed at, and there it would be like, I have options, and I can either go the modern medicine route, so to speak, or I could go the homeopathy route, which still is modern in its own ways. I mean, they're always advancing and learning and expanding upon the knowledge, right? I mean, there's different ways to look at it, but I guess the question would be, what is the sense there of what, you know, the success difference between the various different modalities? Like, do people openly understand that this does work pretty well for everything?
I mean, there is a small group of people that I've encountered that are skeptical towards homeopathy, but for the most part, in India they created a ministry of I'll call it alternative medicine. They call it Ayush, and it's an acronym, and the H in Ayush stands for homeopathy. So it's a ministry of Indian medicine. And that was created because they felt that under the Ministry of Health, not enough money was going into alternative medicine, and they wanted to build that. So yeah, there is a different culture in India, and there's, that's what I love about India. It feels very magical. And I don't want to say that homeopathy is just, quote unquote magic. But I think they're more willing to try things that we don't understand. And what happens is they have positive experiences, and they see it working, and they see it working over and over and over again, and they tell their friends, and they turn their family, and they send more and more people to try it. I mean, my experience, homeopathy was more popular than Ayurveda in India, but I think it depends where you are in India.
Nice. Okay, so let's get back into now. It's like we've talked about it. We got a little bit of stuff here. How exactly, we talked about dilution, diluting it to there's nothing in it, and then all of a sudden that's supposed to help people. What's going on?
What's going on? Well,
homeopathy?
we're still trying to figure that out, and I know physicists and chemists who are working on it, and epidemiologists and immunologists. So there's a handful of people. There isn't a lot of money to research this stuff available, but there's some interesting things that we're starting to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, not all homeopathy is completely diluted to the point of nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
The basic tenet of homeopathy is like cures like, and that's what homeopathy means.
Right.
Homeo, which is like or similar, and pathy, which is pathology, disease. So when you're giving someone a very small trigger, an amount of something that would cause the symptoms they're having in a healthy person.
Mm-hmm.
So I always use the example of coffee because I think most people can wrap their head around that one, and we all know coffee makes you alert, gets your mind racing if you're trying to go to sleep, can keep you awake. So for some people, it's a really good remedy to help them get to sleep. So that's an example of how we use it. And we can use it in very low potencies, which means it hasn't gone through a lot of dilution.
Mm-hmm.
We can use mother tinctures, which means it hasn't been diluted at all.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of our remedies that we use in our daily practice are diluted past Avogadro's number, which is a constant number where by the point you get there, there should be nothing of the original substance left.
Now, when they say nothing, are we talking about material, or are we talking about that which cannot, are we getting down to the quantum at this point?
No, we're talking about material.
Some material.
Point. And what's strange is when they have looked at remedies under electron microscopes is that is not the case. They are finding nanoparticles of the original source material
mm-hmm.
in the remedies.
Right. So in essence, there's still a signature, there's still an energy, there's still a knowing in the electron that it was touched by or influenced by a specific.
Right. So one of the ideas, they're starting to combine the different philosophies. So there is an electromagnetic field being created, or maybe some other kind of field that we're not even aware yet, mm-hmm. which is quite possible. And there's nanoparticles being created, because between the dilution, this is a really important step. We succuss it, which is you hit usually a glass vial really hard, at least like around 100 succussions. And what we found is that causes, for fractions of a second, very high temperatures in those bottles. It also causes the sloughing off of silica nanoparticles from the glass, which we know is a conductor. And then we've got these nanoparticles, and the idea is that maybe there's nanobubbles being formed, so the water is creating patterns based on that frequency, and those patterns start to propagate within the medicine or within the water. Mm-hmm. There's so little we know about water. It's one of the great mysteries of the world. And so there's a pretty good chance it's the water itself that's carrying the information. Yeah. And there's people doing work. Does it work through our cell receptors? Is it communicating with our mitochondria? Like, how is it communicating with our body to provide that information? We're not clear on that yet, or that information hasn't been published publicly so that we can freely express it. Yeah. Right.
So in terms of how it then gets into what they call a sugar pill, right? Which I know when you take it, the process is you're not really supposed to touch anything. It's all, the containers allow for, almost like you could twist one out.
Yeah, there's this whole ritual to taking the pill. I wonder if that adds to the
process.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I don't think there's I think placebo effect.
Yeah.
Is part of any form of medicine.
Absolutely.
I think the consultative effect is also part of it. But we have a lot of research and evidence on, plants and cell lines and animals and babies where there shouldn't be a placebo effect.
Right.
So I think it's a combination of all of it working together.
Nice.
But yeah, we say that you can, I guess the idea is that you can either contaminate the pellet or you dose yourself by touching the pellet. So you're dosing yourself multiple times.
Right.
But I've had people grab them not knowing, and it still works.
Yeah, it still works fine.
Yeah.
So let's get into, at some point you were inspired to make a film about this, which before we started this, you were talking about, you feel like you're still working on the film and it's still going. And I think you said 7 years, that it's been sort of since, I guess, the inception of the idea.
Yeah.
Why did you want to make a film?
Oh, there's so many answers to this, but I was feeling like the mainstream media was only showing one perspective, and even alternative media, or really left-wing media that I listened to and trusted and believed in, was not even either talking about it, it didn't exist, or had a very biased perspective and built this narrative around how stupid homeopathy is and how ridiculous. So I felt at that point that I was trying to figure out ways to reach large amounts of people, and that was the idea that just fell into my lap.
Yeah, just make a film. And I mean, I know from making a couple of myself, it's like it always ends up being more than you initially expected and envisioned, and even when you think it's going to be a big project, it's always a bigger project and all that. But in the film, you traveled around, you went to different countries, you followed various people around, you really looked into this thing, and there were so many fascinating aspects to it. But like I kind of want to center back to some of the, I guess, the skepticism for a second. I mean, in the film, you interviewed a specific individual who said, many, many, many times over, I don't know why. And it was funny. The way he said it to me was like, duh, so to speak, like in sense that he should be like having an aha moment here. He was going, all these different things. And he was listing off things that had been like people believed in, and then they stopped believing in. So it's like over time. So it's like, people used to think, if you like ate liver, it would heal your liver. And he would go through all these examples. And he's like, in homeopathy, people were believing it, and they still somehow it has managed to make its way through the test of time. And it's like, well, yeah, because it works. Like, it's like, do you think people would still be doing it for this long if it didn't work? And so where does this come from? When people say it's been debunked many times over, where does this come from?
You want my conspiracy theory perspective?
I'm
not supposed to share.
Whatever you openly believe in can share under your,
Well, I think homeopathy is, since its inception, since Hahnemann, who's the founder of homeopathy, started, he kind of left us with a history of battling the what we call allopathic medical system. So when he started feeling that the pharmacists weren't actually making his remedies as how they should be making them. And he tested a few times, a few of the pharmacies, he'd make up fake prescriptions of things that didn't exist. And he'd send the person off to the pharmacy and they'd leave with their prescription filled. And he started wondering, like, he stopped trusting the pharmacies.
Right.
And he decided to make his own remedies and encouraged all the homeopaths to make their own remedies. And this is where, this battle started between homeopathy and allopathy in a way that we haven't seen with other forms of natural medicine, I think. And that just continued. Like, he got kicked out of different cities. He moved to different counties to keep practicing. Because he was creating, like, he wanted to separate himself completely from the allopathic stream. He didn't trust them. He didn't trust the pharmacists. And so that meant that they were losing money, basically. Yeah. And I think that's just continued. There's been, I think, fairly recent, renewed, intense attack against homeopathy over the last few years. And one of my ideas, or one of the reasons I think it may be happening, has to do with something called homeoprophylaxis, which is preventing disease using homeopathy. And it has a very long history of, like, since Hahnemann's time, where he was preventing scarlet fever with a remedy called belladonna. And governments around the world started to use this with a lot of success. So in the film, I talk about what they did in Cuba with leptospirosis. Where they stopped the epidemic in 2 weeks. But they've also done, like, their biggest intervention was influenza, was when H1N1 came out. And that was 9 million people who took part in that. So there's very large scale real world interventions. Brazil also with Japanese encephalitis, meningitis B, meningococcal meningitis B. India did a huge campaign with Japanese encephalitis with 20 million children in Andhra Pradesh getting homeoprophylaxis every year. And they were successful. Their epidemiological statistics show that these diseases, the numbers and incidences all went down dramatically. And that's a huge threat to the pharmaceutical industry.
Right. Because essentially what you're saying is it's another form of quote unquote vaccination.
Yeah, we'll call it immunization.
Yes.
And I can't legally say that homeopathy is an alternative to immunization.
Yeah.
But I can show examples where countries have used it, also particularly in cases where the vaccine wasn't available and there were no other options.
And so I recall, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but there was an effective efficacy number that was given. I believe the one doctor here from Toronto was interviewed. He talks about he's a homeopathy doctor, and he was talking specifically about using this form of immunization and the success rate. Right. I think it was somewhere in the 90s.
So that's Isaac Golden. He's actually Australian.
Oh, okay.
And he happened to be in Toronto.
There you go.
He was teaching a course here. And by sheer coincidence, Marketplace had sent him an email asking him if they could interview him.
Yeah.
And he foolishly said yes. And I warned him not to do it.
Yeah.
But he ended up saying yes. He could handle the media.
Yeah.
But as long as that I could come in with my cameras and film the interviews.
Which was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, but all the CBC people refused to sign the release forms so that I could show them
what actually happened.
Yeah, well, so I couldn't show them, like the producer specifically or the cameraman. So we see the back of her head. You can't identify her. But we could show everything he said.
Yeah. Did you get a sense during the interview that they were trying to go a specific route? Like, was it obvious that they were pushing for it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, when you see the final product, the Marketplace episode, they totally take him out of context. They make him say things he never actually said. Yeah. Which was, you think of CBC as independent media that you can believe in and part of our democratic system in Canada, and it just shows you that it isn't always the case. Yeah, I think sometimes they do good work, and a lot of the time they don't.
And they're subsidized in part by the government as well. Yeah. Which is interesting.
In a big part, they're subsidized by the government. That's part of our democratic system, to have independent press that isn't affiliated with any corporate interests, right? Right.
Yeah. But yet they have government interests which have corporate interess. Exactly. It's a way of sneaking it around, sort of like water fluoridation. It's a way of it's okay. It's a way of sort of sneaking a toxic waste chemical into the environment without actually having to pay for it. And so they invented water fluoridation. Exactly. But, okay, so let's go back to this. And he was talking about how effective it is.
So Isaac did, his own small study with a few thousand individuals, and it was part of his PhD work in Australia. And he was being supervised by, very well-respected epidemiologists. And he did a study comparing kids who were vaccinated, kids who weren't vaccinated, kids who had constitutional naturopathic and homeopathic care, and kids who went through this protocol of homeoprophylaxis. And it's interesting, the kids who got the homeoprophylaxis, according to his work and his numbers, were as protected as the kids who got the vaccinations, but they didn't have the same number of chronic illnesses. Yeah. And actually, in his study, the chronic illness was lowest in the group that got the homeoprophylaxis. And he looked at things like eczema and allergies and, those kinds of inflammatory chronic conditions. It's one study. Yeah. So, and it's ongoing, but it's also an observational study where you're looking back. So for some people, it's not particularly strong evidence. Yeah. But based on his protocols, Cuba did the work they did, And I think that's particularly strong evidence.
Yeah. Well, and this is why, again, I encourage people to watch the film, because it's like, for me, you watching the film and it's like, okay, we're seeing, I already resonate with this stuff, right? And so, I'm looking at it, but I'm like, I have a critical mind. We're in media. I understand that, we've watched what mainstream and a lot of alternative media has done in the world in general. There's a lot of bias there. Bias doesn't lead us anywhere when we report on things that way, right? So I'm looking at it and I'm saying, okay, but we still need to see, what's going on. Like I understand, energy medicine, and I understand how these things can function, right? And I've looked into so much research and all this stuff. When I started seeing the Cuba results, and, here's just people coming together with passion, creating stuff and then delivering it to as many people as they possibly can. And then you see the numbers after and you're just like, why did they shut this program down? Like, what? Right? And, even in Africa, seeing the success of treating people with HIV/AIDS. And it's like, okay, and it's still not legal.
So homeopathy was legal at that time when I was filming in Africa. It was encouraged. People were happy with it. They're working in conjunction with hospitals. I interviewed the director of the hospital who, when he saw what was going on with these guys, went and studied homeopathy himself. And he's a medical doctor. And you saw that all the doctors, they weren't feeling threatened. They felt that this was a system they could work hand in hand with for the betterment of their patients. And then what I understand is a new president came into power, and that president, like under external pressure, has not made the remedies themselves legal. Mm-hmm. So it's this kind of loophole where homeopathy is acknowledged as a proper form of medicine, but the medicines themselves can't technically be used.
Right. So does that mean like they can't be sold, or does that mean like...
I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know. They're still working there. They've closed their main clinic down. But like they had a brick and mortar place, and now instead they're just seeing people at all these different community clinics. But I don't there's not a lot of people trying to stop them. I think they're doing really good work, and they're going to places where there's no other form of medical care available. Yeah. So
So, here though, when you practice here in Toronto, and we were talking about this a little bit before too, it's like, do people come in skeptical? Do they come in, being open to it? Like, what's that like?
When I started practicing in Toronto, no one knew what it was, and they came in our office thinking we were naturopaths.
Okay.
We got a lot of people from other parts of the world who know homeopathy, like Mexicans. I got a whole slew of Mexicans. They grow up with homeopathy. It's very common. Mm-hmm. Lots of Latin America uses a lot of homeopathy. Yeah. So people either came in knowing what it was or thinking I was a naturopath and getting confused. Now, I think it's changed. People come in, they know what homeopathy is. They're looking specifically for a homeopath. So there's more awareness, and I don't know if all this negative media has helped us in this way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and when I get people who are skeptical, it's because their partner is forcing them to come.
Right. So it's like, hey, come, this is gonna work. Yeah. Yeah.
And you get patients that they come in and you're like, so how are your headaches? What headaches? I never had any headaches. It says here you had headaches. No, the remedy didn't work. I never had any headaches. We talked for 20 minutes about your headache.
Yeah.
So I don't think it matters if someone's skeptical to the treatment.
Yeah.
So a lot of people like to say, well, you need to believe in it for it to work. I believe in it, so it works. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I always think there's more to it than just your initial thoughts, right? I mean, that plays a part and it can help enhance things, but there's so much more to it. And that's even a whole subject of how consciousness creates reality that, I think we're being asked to go a lot deeper on than we commonly hear people say, like, oh, your thoughts create reality. Well, sort of. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more to that equation, and it's not that simple.
And that takes me back to your question about why are these skeptics having so much trouble with it?
Yes.
I think a lot of them are very materialist in their perspectives. And what's interesting is when I was out filming and interviewing people and I asked, who are these skeptics? All of them said, oh, they're atheists. And I was like, so they're atheists. What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah.
But what that meant is that they're materialists, and they're
Uh-huh.
not willing to consider that there's anything outside of
material.
basic chemistry in the material world we live in.
Yeah.
And when you suddenly show them this research that says homeopathy works, that's pointing to something else that they just can't wrap their heads around, and it destroys their foundation on which they stand, and they can't have that. So your instant response is to stand up against it and say, that's not possible.
That can't be. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because, I mean, you're familiar with the Heart Math Institute?
Yes. I have to think about it.
Yeah, so they like, in particular, and I'll use this example because, you know, they do really good work, and they do it in a way that's very scientifically rigorous. And you know, one of their biggest findings over, you know, the past while that they continue to do work on, that they continue to show is there's a magnetic field, in essence, that the heart will emit, right? And it speaks to the brain, and it speaks to other people's heart, and you can feel and sense and understand, and it's intelligent. There's an intuitive intelligence within the heart via this magnetic field. And so here's something that's non-material that there's a ton of evidence for, that, you know, really helps to illustrate a connection or relationship that we have with one another via an invisible, what some people in the spiritual community will call an aura, right, in a sense. And it's not to overcall, or it's not to confuse it with different ways, but some people might call it that, right? But really it's a magnetic field. And so it's like, here it is. Now, what are these, you know, scientists, when they see that work, this published science, this stuff going on, like, what do they do? Like that one particular gentleman who's sitting at his desk in the film, and he's got all the ducks around him because he likes to point out the quacks. Like, you know, what do they do when they see this stuff and it's like, this is here, this is real?
Yeah.
Like,
so they have to dig in and figure out how that study is faulty.
mm-hmm.
And there isn't a single study on the planet that is bulletproof.
Uh-huh.
Like, they're not perfect.
Right.
And so you can break apart any study. And so that's what they try to do. They try to nitpick and find the little details that could maybe invalidate the study. Or they just start saying that, or what they do is, instead of discrediting the work itself, is they go after the individual,
Yeah.
and they'll discredit the individual, and they call them crazy, and
Yeah.
they'll find different ways to make them look foolish, even if it's not based on truth.
Mm-hmm. So, again, just going back to the one gentleman, I mean, he really felt like he was doing good work to...
I think he does, but you also have to look where... So his name's Joe Schwartz.
Yeah.
And he's from Montreal, and he works at McGill, and he runs a skeptic association there. And the skeptic group is funded by the Trottier Foundation. And Trottier sits on the board of a pharmaceutical company and made his fortune on cell phone technology. So you'll see these fantastic videos. And Joe Schwartz is all over the internet. He writes regularly for the Montreal Gazette. He's written a bunch of books. He's very popular. And you'll see, I came across this video where he's talking about how, you know, cell phones don't cause brain tumors, or the risk is so minimal that it's not worth considering. Yeah. And you think about where his money's coming from to fund his organization. I think he believes in the work he does. I think he is genuine, but you know, I think there's something to be said about who he's looking for funding from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But he's also very ignorant. Like, he touts himself as an expert on homeopathy. He understands what it is. He's looked at the research. And every study that I brought to his attention, he was unfamiliar with. And he just would say, oh, that's impossible. It can't be true. And that was his automatic response.
And it didn't go much further? He wasn't like, you know, I'd be happy to look into that, or it was just, no, that can't be true.
So, for example, I asked him about the work in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, it's a no-sode, and no-sodes are remedies made from bacteria or viruses. So it's possible that if you've diluted it to a certain point, that you're giving people a little bit of that virus or bacteria, so you're actually inoculating them in a material way. I said, but they were using potencies of 200C and 10M, which are very high potencies. Yeah. He goes, oh, that's impossible then. Yeah, no. And that was it. That's where it ended.
Oh, man. And then,
so you can't even have an intelligent discussion with them.
And I think this is the challenge. And you know, you kind of went back to it when you said, we were kind of getting into the immunization sort of thing, and you talked about press, and there was all these, it's been difficult because there's almost like this war out against whether it's naturopaths, whether it's homeopathy, whether it's people doing any form of alternative treatment in general. It's like there's this attack, and it almost seems to be ever since the vaccine debate. And I know we can't talk too much about some of this stuff, but just legally for yourself. But it's kind of like there seems to be a relationship between press and the way press is informed, and pharmaceutical companies and modern medicine that is convincing people that this stuff is not real and it's a big joke. And the more passion, the more excitement that people have, and the more they see for themselves these various things that are actually happening, the greater the attacks from the other side is getting.
Yeah, and it's getting really, really bad right now. The FDA, for example, put out a draft document to amend how they look at homeopathy. And homeopathy has been basically, it's just been outside of regulation technically, but it's been approved and was grandfathered into the FDA since the inception of the FDA.
Yeah.
And part of that was because the senator who introduced the bill to create the FDA was in fact a homeopath. So there's a huge history of homeopathy in the US. Presidents used to use it. We had homeopathic hospitals. Like there's still a hospital in Philadelphia called the Hahnemann Hospital. It's a huge hospital. There's a memorial to Hahnemann in Washington, D.C., erected by a president.
Yeah.
So there's this huge history. And now suddenly the FDA is saying, I think we're going to use a risk-based assessment, but basically homeopathic remedies haven't gone through the new drug process of approval, so they're illegal.
Yeah.
And this new drug process, it's hard for homeopathy to pass the kind of research that they think that they want to see, because homeopathy is individualized and we don't use a remedy for a pathology generally.
Yeah.
And
it's based on a unique person's whole
expression of their symptoms. And you might have like 10 good remedies for specific pathology, but different people are going to need different ones.
Right.
So it's very hard to research it in the way that the FDA wants to see the studies. And we're looking at like $300 million per remedy, per pathology.
Yeah.
And the homeopathic industry does not have that kind of money. And we've got thousands of homeopathic remedies. So you're looking at, in the long run, they're setting themselves up to shut down homeopathy.
Right. And it's interesting too, because it's like when you look at, so again, the way the business of it functions, and when we talk about regulation, it's like, oh yeah, regulation is important. I understand why we need it. And that's an average consumer response, right? It's like, yeah, I know it, but if we don't have regulation, then any old quack can make something, and it's like, yeah, well, okay, I get that. But let's also think of it from the other perspective. It's like the pharmaceutical industry loves one-size-fits-all drugs. They love, okay, you have a symptom, here it is, because they can produce tons of it.
And that doesn't even work in conventional medicine, but that's what they're doing.
That's right, but that's what they're doing. And so this is like, here we, through tax dollars and so forth, we're funding these organizations to then make these decisions that actually harm our health. And every time that there's people out there that are actually saying, hey, I want to sit down with you. I want to deeply understand what you have going on as an individual, right? And they're saying, no, that's not the right way to do it. And this is a scary thing in a sense, because and not real fear, but it's like just really thinking about it. Like, is that the world we want to live in? Is that what we want to support? Right. And so when they say this draft document to in essence sort of like make homeopathy illegal, like what's the current status on this? So they've put out a document stating that we're thinking about kind of doing this.
So they put out the document, they set out a time period for comments, and comments were supposed to close, but a fantastic group of women, moms who were not homeopaths but used homeopathy in their lives, came together, created an organization called Americans for Homeopathy Choice, and they started meeting with the FDA. They went to Washington, D.C., and they started meeting with senators and congressmen and, talked to them about what was going on. And the issue isn't just, does homeopathy work or not? Because basically it's non-toxic. It's not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
The question is, do we have a right to choose what kind of medicine we think is right for us and how we want to treat our own bodies?
Absolutely.
And so it becomes a democratic like an issue of freedoms.
Yeah.
Not of democracy, but of freedoms. And I think that's a really important issue in the States.
Yes.
So there was enough pressure on the FDA to extend the comment period.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so Americans for Homeopathy Choice followed up with a petition. And these kinds of petitions kind of stall the process so that the FDA can't move forward until they've addressed the issues within the petition.
Right.
So now they're asking for people in the States to send their comments to the FDA about the petition. And if you go to their website, which is homeopathychoice.org, I believe. But if you look up Americans for Homeopathy Choice, you'll find them. And they'll walk you through how to send in your comments, what the petition says. But basically, up until this point, for the last, I think it's like 20 years, don't quote me on the number there, but the FDA has had policies around homeopathy, and there's a policy called the CPG 400.400 that basically states out, that homeopathy remedies do have to be manufactured to a certain level of quality as per like the homeopathic pharmacopoeia of the states. So it creates a standard of quality, and that what you're buying at the store is actually what it says it is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that they're getting rid of all of that. Like they're getting rid of any quality standards with this new draft guidance document. So it's part of their petition and wanting to go back to those things and basically safeguarding the right to access homeopathy.
Yeah. And so I would love to look into this, but off the top of your mind, do you know if like there was a lot of, I guess, mainstream press coverage about this group and what they were doing and working on? No, very little.
I haven't seen anything in the mainstream. We've seen stuff on, alternative media.
Yeah, because I hadn't even heard of this, right?
Like she was on Jenny McCarthy's show and Del Bigtree, and, we've been pushing a lot online. But no, there's nothing in mainstream media about it.
Yeah, and if they did, it would probably be a bunch of quacks are trying to,
Yeah,
so
and you do see the occasional thing of like, yes, this is what the FDA should be doing. We should be stopping this garbage medicine that doesn't work and is luring people away and making them spend lots of money. And you think about the States and how much money people are spending on conventional treatments, and you're offering them a homeopathic remedy for $8.
Yeah. And it's like, I remember in the film they were saying that to treat in India a serious disease like a cancer, maybe like $100 a year, so to speak. And it's like when I heard that, right, and I'm going through it and I'm thinking, at the same time in Africa where they were distributing patients one-on-one, I was thinking, I don't remember if it covered it because I don't recall hearing it, but they didn't say whether or not they're paying for it or whether or not the people are giving it. But either way, it seemed like it was almost a moot point. This stuff is so inexpensive that it could freely be given to people if need be. Yeah.
Like the Cubans, to make their remedies cost them 5 cents a dose. Where you think about the cost of making a vaccine, the cost of transporting, you need a cold chain, the training people need in order to administer. It's a huge factor, not just in the manufacturing costs, but the whole chain along the way to get it to people.
For sure. And that's I always bring this up. It's like that's our tax dollar, so to speak, right? That's our, not so to speak, it is, right? Like that's we're paying for that. And one of the examples I always give is like conventional farming versus organic farming, right? It's like we've seen, and of course they try and do all the studies and whatever, but we know that just by practice, like by basic common sense, organic farming is going to produce a higher quality product at the end of the day, nutritionally, everything, blah, 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 than conventional farming. Now, this isn't to say necessarily that organic farming is at the height of everything, because there's things that go even beyond that and that are better. However, it's like the government subsidizes the conventional farming, the farming of genetically modified foods and all these sorts of things, most of which ends up being corn syrup or so forth that ends up on people's table as a really, really, really low quality product. And it's like we're paying to make ourselves sick. And then we're paying to treat ourselves with things that make us even more sick. And this is our tax dollar, and we could be looking at things like homeopathy and spending a hell of a lot less
Yeah.
to achieve the same results, potentially better in the long run because we have less illnesses and so forth that go along with it. And likewise with the farming end of it. And we'd be saving money.
Taxpayers are saving money, but industry is losing money. And who's really controlling the purse strings is industry.
That's right.
But there have been several studies done on the cost-saving factors of homeopathy, completely devoid of whether it's effective or not.
Yeah.
But people who use homeopathy end up using less antibiotics,
Mm-hmm.
end up being hospitalized less, and cost the system a lot less money. Like Prince Charles did a study that showed how much money the NHS, the National Health System in the UK, would save if they funded homeopathy even more, in terms of saving costs on antibiotics.
Yeah.
And it was significant enough that it really scared the industry. And that was one of those also triggers for a stronger attack on homeopathy in the UK.
Yeah, I think it was, and I don't know the exacts on this, but I heard Australia has been getting pretty intense with homeopathy. Have they moved to all out ban it, or?
Not quite yet. There hasn't been a ban. So they did a study that was funded by, it's called the NHMRC. I've got the acronym. Can I remember what it stands for? It's like the National Health Research Council. Medical Council, whatever. But there's a large campaign right now because they put out a study whose methodology was, I would almost say, fraudulent. It's very questionable. And they claim to have looked at 1,800 studies on homeopathy and then state that homeopathy doesn't work for any condition.
Right.
And once they looked at the study, it was huge. And the first part of the study doesn't show you what's really happened underneath. But basically, they looked at 5 studies because none of the other 1,800 studies matched their very random criteria that they chose as to what is considered a good study.
Right.
And they basically, chose a number of participants that needed to be involved in order to say that that's a high quality study, which is completely outside of basic NHMRC guidelines as to what is considered a good study.
Yeah.
So it was a way of cherry picking 5 studies, one of which was a very good study that was positive for homeopathy, but they failed to address that somehow in their study.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot, and they were also pitting different, they'd go, if 2 studies are positive and 2 studies are negative, that means it doesn't work. They would balance each other out and it would be 0.
Right.
So the methodology was very highly questionable.
Right.
The Homeopathic Association in Australia used a Freedom of Information request to get this to get information. Yeah. And they learned that there had been a previous study and they couldn't get the previous study. But what they learned was that the previous study was buried, that it was considered, they saw comments about how high the quality of that study was. Mm-hmm. And, there's a huge movement and a petition out there to get them to publish the first study.
So even after a FOIA request, it didn't work?
No.
Wow. Or they didn't get it.
They didn't get the first study. They got the information that there was a study. They learned who made it. They learned that person was fired and that they decided to hire someone who they didn't disclose their affiliations. This person's a total skeptic and had associations with skeptic organizations.
Right.
So those affiliations weren't disclosed when he did his new study, which really set out to prove that homeopathy didn't work. Yeah. So based on this really terrible work, study, the government of Australia started setting standards for homeopathy and was taking it off of the public health care system. Wow.
But I mean, taking off the public health care system in the sense that it wouldn't be free for people, but that would,
and it couldn't be covered by insurance plans.
Right. So it's
still available.
Right. Yeah. So doctors going to a homeopathic practitioner, that would be the costly aspect of it, because the remedy itself is inexpensive, but actually seeing and getting the proper, that's where the cost would be for some people, would be difficult.
Out of pocket. And here in Canada, in the States, people pay out of pocket for homeopathy. But it's the first step. It feels like they're really trying to make it illegal in Australia now. And because there's been so much bad press. Homeopaths now can't make a living, and there's fewer and fewer homeopaths able to work.
Yeah.
So the association has now petitioned the ombudsman for a review of this decision.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's really based on faulty data.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting world out there when it comes to a lot of this stuff. And I think people don't realize, and again, going back to the importance of media and stuff, it's like people don't realize how much, you know, when we say we're a viewer, and we notice this all the time ourselves too, it's like when we say we're a viewer of alternative media, it's like sometimes we forget to reflect at, even as viewers of alternative media, how much our perceptions of something are still built from the mainstream press. So it's like we watch alternative press, but sneaking in there is all these perceptions of mainstream press that are still often so many times so manipulated. And I know you had gone through a bit of an experience too, where, and you know, again, it was in the film in more detail, but it was like, I guess your comments and so forth were taken out of context and things you didn't say. And it sort of gets addressed in the film a little bit about what their response was, but I'm curious to hear sort of the whole story of what happened with the walrus. Can you go into some details about that?
Yeah, and I'd like to share that it wasn't just the walrus. Toronto Life, I had a similar experience. But I was contacted by a journalist from the Walrus. And for those who don't know, Walrus is kind of like Harper's Magazine of Canada. So, respectable. They have really, I think, really in-depth, good articles. I love their content. Mm-hmm. And the journalist said, listen, I am writing, I can't remember, like a 7,000 word piece. It's going to be, I'm looking at both sides. I'm really open. It's going to be really balanced. And it was interesting. And we were talking more about homeoprophylaxis rather than vaccination. Mm-hmm. And I talked about, I gave her the research. I gave her the studies from Brazil, the studies from India, the studies from Cuba. We talked about how that was being used. She came to my home and she saw me with my kid. And what was interesting is she painted me in the article as this hysterical helicopter mother, and that these new age parents who won't let their kids play with plastic and are worried about the cleaning solutions they use and won't give their kids sugar, and paints this like picture, when I think I'm one of the least helicopter parents. Free range kids. A whole other issue to talk about. But then the Walrus publishes this article which paints me as this hysterical, crazy mother who, and that all the research I provided them had not been published in peer-reviewed journals. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a sticking point, because I gave them the studies like photocopied from the peer-reviewed publication. Yeah. And I was in shock that they could say that. So I called the editor and I said, that's not possible. And later he left me a message, unfortunately. I didn't talk to him again, but he left me a message saying, well, we decided that they're not peer-reviewed journals because a peer-reviewed journal would never publish anything that wasn't a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And it just goes to show you how ignorant
media,
the people who are telling us what to think and how to think about it, how little they know about science. There's so many different kinds of studies, and there's so many different kinds of work that are published all the time. And if you just rely on RCTs, you're limiting your data. And there are a lot of weaknesses with RCTs. Mm-hmm. So you need a broad spectrum of different kinds of studies to understand what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. And these guys don't have a clue. Right.
Not to mention, it's like, and I have friends who have tried to publish perfectly good, beautiful studies, in various journals, and people are saying, hey, you know what, this is a great study, this is amazing, this could totally, no problem, this will get into a journal, and then, within, days of reporting it or submitting it to the journal, you get, sort of just a letter saying, yeah, no, it's not gonna pass, and no comments. They never tell you why or what or this, just no comments, right? Yeah. And I think people don't realize how much the journals are controlled. And we've had quote after quote after quote of people who've left journals, who used to run journals, and they left journals and say, yeah, the majority of the science in those journals is fraudulent.
Yeah, like the editor, I think, of the New England
Yeah.
Journal of Medicine has spoken out, and some other journals as well. And there's studies like where people put in fraudulent studies and they get through peer review very easily.
Absolutely.
And then if like the journals themselves depend on pharmaceutical advertising dollars, so they're not going to publish something that's going to risk their income.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a bias out there. There are some good places like the Cochrane Group will publish lots of great stuff. Ellesmere, I think it's called, has published some really great homeopathic studies. But we look in the film, I talked to Dr. Jayesh Ballare, who's a chemical engineer in India, and he talks about how they were able to publish their first study. And he says, but it acted like a vaccine. After we published our first study, no one would publish any of our work after that.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, there's a huge problem with publishing bias. And so when they talk about the evidence base for anything, for homeopathy or Western science, and we talk about evidence-based medicine, we don't know how clean and accurate that evidence base is. A lot of that research is being run by pharmaceutical companies with people with other interests.
Absolutely. And this is I like to say, and I'm hoping to make a film on this one day, that the world of science has become unscientific, and people don't realize that which defines our policy, what food is on our table, our healthcare system, and so forth, is in large part unscientific, and for many, many reasons. And that a massive shift in the culture around science needs to take place if we want to bring it back to real science. And that post-material science is this emerging reality that it's just so important. And I think, going back to it, it's like evidence-based medicine, right? We talk so much about how, I got to see studies for that. And the average person is becoming more engaged in, I want to read a study, I want to see this, right? You never didn't hear that, as much, say, 10 or 15 years ago. So you're hearing that more. But the layer that they don't understand is the fact that, how did this study get here? Who funded this study? Why is it that there is no evidence for, or not abundant evidence for, homeopathy in these journals? Well, because they won't allow it.
Yeah. And there's also, you can read a study and it looks pretty legit and it looks good, but you don't know the context in which it was made. There's studies that look at, autism rates in different groups in different countries. And yet when you start to look into it and understand what kind of groups they're looking at and how when they look pre-1985 and post-1985, they're looking at two completely different populations, and they did that on purpose to get the result they want, but that's not, you wouldn't see that in the study. You wouldn't know unless you lived in that country and understood how that medical system worked. There's so many behind the scene things that you wouldn't even get just from reading a study on the surface.
You can tell the story that they want to tell. Yeah. And that's the challenge, is that the amount of bias that's within these things is huge. And I guess another question is, going back to the walrus situation, do you feel, because you were initially asked to do this interview on the pretense that it was a balanced, it's going to be, I'm going to look into both sides and write this really long sort of piece, and I've been through a similar experience, and that's why I'm asking this question, is did you feel that the editor ultimately said, hey, look, you're about to publish this, but we can't allow this, so you need to change this, this, and this? Do you feel that happened, or?
I don't think that happened with the walrus piece. I found out later, she knew what she was going to write, and I'd spoken to her. But that did happen with Toronto Life, for sure. Toronto Life, I guess, ended up, we're doing a piece on autism and vaccines, and had met with a bunch of my patients, and all these patients guided them to me, so they wanted to speak to me. And supposedly what we were talking about was treating autism. It had nothing to do with vaccines, technically, what the article was going to be about. And when they did the fact check, the fact checker was really excited, and she had all these questions about what we were doing. She seemed to believe in the kind of work I was doing, and she had questions about all kinds of studies and methodologies and all these things. And then the article came out, and the only thing that it said was, Ananda Moore didn't vaccinate her child and uses an unproven method.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
All the stuff they had asked about, all the discussion we had had. I even felt the journalist was very open.
Yeah.
None of it made it into the final article. And those were absolutely editorial choices.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's like, it goes back to almost like, here you have people that are trying to tell a story, and I've questioned this again in that own experience that I had. The person was from high school, a friend from high school, and she seems so interested in everything. And I still to this day, because I've asked her outright multiple times, I don't know if she legitimately was interested and believed in everything. We had a great time together. We spent like 2.5 hours going around the office, going through everything, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of it, it was almost like, I flat out asked her. I said, because she ended up interviewing Michael Shermer. I don't know if I just knocked it out. She ended up interviewing Michael Shermer for the other side of it, which she never told me was going to happen, through the process. But, I asked her outright. I'm like, why are you saying things that, one, I didn't say, and two, you've switched around the context of things, quite obviously, so that it would fit a story. I'm like, I'm not upset. I just want to know if it was you or your editor. Completely ignored and kind of went on to this whole thing. And I'm like, it was an email from her publication, and who knows if they have access to that, and they don't want to kick the editor in the butt. But it's like, I honestly feel like these people are, in essence, they feel they have a responsibility and they control. So it's like, you're not only reading media and that's controlled by whatever corporation is, but you're also through the bias of the editor, who wants it. So it's like, really, what choices are we really getting in terms of media?
I'm at the point where I don't know what to believe, and unless I have a personal experience and I've done the research myself, I don't believe stuff anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's really, really frustrating.
Yeah.
I feel really disempowered.
Yeah. It's really tough. And again, it's like, we just had an interview. We went down to I didn't go. It was a couple of our journalists went down and interviewed someone who had been a child sex slave when she was like 6 years old and went through this whole experience. And I'm just thinking, like, if they didn't go directly to like meet with this person, feel their authenticity and hear the whole story and all this sort of stuff, it's like, how would you know in this day and age with how much we've been sort of deceived, and with how much, like, it's almost like anytime something comes out, we're itching to find a way to like pull it apart and find out why it's not true. And it's like, where did that come from? Where did that culture come from of, instead of seeing a fellow human and being like, okay, that's an interesting story, I'm curious to kind of go through this journey with you and explore it, and we're like happy with each other and like love each other. Instead, we assume that every single human on this planet is somehow trying to take us for a ride, and that is the goal of every single human. It's like,
I've actually been wanting to write an article on what I'm terming a culture of skepticism.
Yeah.
Because that's what's being imbued. It's like, it's this idea that you can't believe anything until it's been proven to you in a material manner. Right. Even if you've seen it, even if you've experienced it, it can't be true. Right. And so you have to doubt everything you've ever heard. And I think that's, when we're talking about cultural differences, that's the difference with India. Yes. Is they're willing to accept and try. Yes. And then if it doesn't work, and there's some incredible scientists in India. They're very intelligent. Like, we're not, I think people go, oh, it's a developing country. They're uneducated. There's, and I think that's one of the things we have to forget about. But they're willing to accept, try, figure it out. And then if it doesn't work, they may discount it or look at why it didn't work. Versus here, where you have to go, oh, can't work. And it's like guilty until proven innocent. Right. It's the opposite
Absolutely.
effect.
Yeah. It's sort of like, a great scientist, and this is at least from my experience and research, is it's like a great scientist included within themselves and their understanding and their exploration of the world, not only the material, but the post-material, the something outside of themselves. They followed intuition and sense and gut feelings and different things that weren't based on emotion, as materialists will always say. It's like, it's all just emotion. It's like, no, these people had a legitimate, like, profound experience that they felt. And we've educated that out of people so much so that you actually can't understand or ever believe or ever know something how many things do we know commonsensically or intuitively? We know, but we can't do anything about it until there's a study. It's like, you already know it. You already know it to be true. And you said earlier that India has this sort of magical feel, right? And it's probably in part because their sense of spirituality, their sense of self, their sense of exploring who we truly are is brought into the everyday life in a non-religious, say, form, more on average than here in the West, where it's you're either like a religious going, God-fearing type individual in a lot of cases, or you're a material atheist science, and that's it. And there's no in between, you know?
Yeah. Though I do want to say a lot of what we see in the media, I think, doesn't represent the true population.
True, absolutely.
And what people are thinking and feeling. We see these representations that tell us that this is what people think. And I don't know if you've heard the term astroturfing.
Oh, yes. Yes.
But, you know, I think there are these manufactured grassroots movements that are not real, and they're supposedly being run by people in our communities who are concerned. And in fact, it's all been painted that way. Yeah. I think people are a lot more open to different ways of looking at the world than the media's painting.
Absolutely. And it's like they're working hard to try and create this picture of like, don't believe, don't do this, don't do that. Meanwhile, it's like people are questioning things more than they ever have. Yeah. You know, and it's exciting. It's exciting that that's happening.
For sure.
You know, so where at this point can people see the film?
Okay, so right now it's played at a bunch of film festivals. We're waiting to hear back from a few more. Festivals don't like this film. It's too controversial for them. But fingers crossed. And right now we're going through community screening process. So if people want to watch the film, they can go to the website magicpillsmovie.com. They can go to the host a screening link. And there's videos there. It explains what the process is, but you can host a screening in your community. And it can be super simple. Like you can invite a bunch of friends over for dinner, pop a DVD in, and have like this little home Tupperware party screening. Or people are renting theaters and having a full cinematic experience and inviting the whole community to watch. So there's, different levels of doing that. And I'm trying to spread it that way right now because I want people to talk about the film. I think the internet is shutting us down in a lot of ways, and we need to find alternative ways of spreading the word. Yeah. So I want it to go from person to person to person. So you show 10 friends the film, they get excited, they show 10 friends the film, and that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. But hopefully in 2019 it should be available on DVD and streaming. But I want to bring community together to watch it with people. Nice.
Yeah. And it works because after I watched it, I came in here in the office the next day and I was like, oh my God, there's so many things, like, because it, again, when it comes together and you're like every question you ever have about homeopathy, first off, was pretty well answered throughout the film and the various real life cases that kind of explored it. But not only that, you start to realize like, this is really, really undeniably effective. And it's difficult to just sort of turn your back on that. Do you know what I mean? Like you're almost like, I've used homeopathy before, but I have this, this greater sense of, the next time I do get anything, which, it happens from time to time. It's like, that may be one of the first things I think about. Usually what I do is I fast, I eat fruits and vegetables, right? But I'm like, if anything ever really comes on like that, like I'm going here. You know what I mean? Whereas I didn't think that way in the past because it was more so like, I've done it, I've tried it, I've seen it be effective in certain things, but it wasn't like a number one thought.
And you don't think of it, like a lot of people just think of it for colds and sprained ankle and small things like
Arnica
that.
And just, yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Where, and I think we've been silenced. People are scared. My community's scared with this film. Yeah. They don't want to draw attention to cancer treatment, to disease prevention, to AIDS, because they think that's going to cause the powers that be to want to shut us down even faster, because it becomes a greater threat to the medical pharmaceutical system. Yeah. So they're scared. A lot of them don't want this film out there.
Yeah.
But my perspective is, if people think it's only good for colds and flus, when it disappears, no one's gonna care.
Yeah.
Like they're not gonna know what it is. They're not gonna care because it has no major impact on their life. But when they realize how significant homeopathy can be, and I think how life-saving it can be, it totally changes the picture around.
Absolutely. And I do believe that, we're in a time where information's coming out. People are open. People want to hear things. And consciousness is a powerful thing. And, we always are approaching here is there is no battle going on, because we're waking up to a reality that everybody deeply kind of sort of wants to see change, right? We want to see that. And if you believe and you really anchor in that there's this massive battle and we got to fight and we got to do all this, and there's an enemy and we got to do that, then you create more of that fight, right? Like we join the lashes and the battles. Whereas if we go, hey, look, yes, I can observe that they don't want this information to come out, but it's going to come out and we're doing it anyway. And they can go cry in the corner and say what they want to say, but this is going to happen. And if you take that approach and you anchor in that approach, no one's shutting anything down. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, you're giving people power. You're giving people perspectives.
Exactly.
So they can look at the same issue in a different way.
For sure. It's true empowerment versus believing you're empowered by getting really angry.
Like I tried to make a balanced film. I tried to show both sides of the story, and I've had skeptics come to the film and feel that they were well represented. Yeah. And they're going, oh, I didn't know this. Maybe I should look at it.
For sure.
And that's, yeah,
and I absolutely felt that too. I was like, you interviewed people that very much gave the viewer a different side to it, a different approach, but I think importantly it was done in a way that allows people to say, okay, you know what, if I go, now that I've heard this, if I go and first thing I might do is I might verify what she talked about in the Cuba and the Brazil and India thing, and really look at these things, and you have a chance to actually explore for yourself, as opposed to like, okay, I give you one side of the story, or I'm just smashing it down the whole time. And it's like, you didn't make anybody look bad in the film or good or anything. They speak for themselves. If they say something and then 4 scenes later it's proven incorrect, it happened by real happenstance. Do you know what I mean? Not, all right, let's find a way to make, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's important, and I commend you on doing that, because it's an important way to go about it.
Yeah.
So
I thought so. I wanted to engage people of every perspective, rather than go, oh, you guys are morons.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do to us.
For sure. And we know that, taking that route doesn't really change a whole lot of things, right? When you come from an extreme, you're asking for there to be the extreme fight you back.
Yeah.
And so when we come from, hey, this is the information, it's like, all right, well, I can't not look at this. That's why I asked about the one guy. I think you said his name was Joe Schwartz.
Yeah.
I asked it because it's almost like I would suspect, given what's been presented in the film and given what he was saying, that he would have no choice but to look into these things, because they're pretty damn obvious that there's something there.
But he'll find something. Like, he will look at every study and go, oh, this one little thing is missing, or, it was a retrospective study, or they'll find a reason to not.
But what about like the Cuba examples? Like, what can he find in that?
You would like
the people aren't sick.
If you go online, what they did with Cuba is they people started publishing the study with false graphs and numbers that weren't accurate, and then dissing the study and saying, well, this isn't, like, look at the numbers. There's no way, like, what they're saying is in fact backed up by their data. And what they did was recreate the graphs and change the numbers.
Oh my Jesus.
And so that's the kind of stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
And you can find those online.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's again, the film is, I would watch the film if you're watching this, and, go check it out, because it gives you a really good, like, it's a wake up call if you haven't sort of seen this and gone through it. And it's, at the same time, you get to kind of see and feel what people who are trailblazing like yourself, what you kind of go through, and some of the backlash and the media spinning things and stuff. And it also gives you a sense of empathy for anybody who's had the media spin their words. It allows you to think, like, might that have been spun? Might that have been, which is an important thing when we're, again, thinking critically and feeling things out, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, if people want to watch a film, magicpillsmovie.com.
Yep.
And we want to build a grassroots movement, and part of that process is through our mailing list.
Yeah.
So if people are interested, they want to become active, help with petitions and that sort of thing, we send out all that information through our mailing list, and you can sign on on the website.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what would you, like, the last thought, the last, like, I want people to know and understand this or question this about homeopathy. What's your...
Oh.
it doesn't have to be the all-encompassing quote, but...
What should people question?
What's your biggest takeaway from the film, even, like, that you found was fascinating?
I went into this very open-minded and willing to find out that homeopathy didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But I met person after person after person. I got free access to the Banerjee clinic. I sat in line and talked to people. I went in. People have long-term improvements, and
with serious illnesses.
With serious illness.
Yeah.
And the other big takeaway for me was questioning what the media is presenting to us in a serious manner, because even really well-educated, deep-thinking individuals don't realize how much of the media out there is biased and showing a one-sided perspective. Mm-hmm. So, especially when it's coming from, like, the New York Times, or Harper's, or these publications that we really respect. There's issues there too. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming in and doing this and talking about this stuff, and
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. All right.